Verse number 5. And one of the elders saith unto me, weep not. Behold, now listen to the criteria, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. Now, in this one verse, Jimmy, we've got 3 elements that narrow this down, and the only option possible becomes Jesus. And so we talk about our hyperlink. So let's get into a hyperlink. We have these three criteria in verse number 5. It's got to be somebody that's called a lion. It's got to be from the tribe of Judah. And it's going to be not just from David, folks. Jesus wasn't just the seed of David, although he was. But he's also the root of David, which means he was the cause of David and the result of David. He was before David, and he came from David. He's the root and the offspring of David. He's the root of David and also the branch of David. It's the only way it could work. And so let's go to a couple passages. Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49. And in Genesis 49, we have what I've often referred to, or has heard referred to as the judgment seat of Jacob. It's really the blessings that Jacob is giving to his children on his deathbed. And as Jacob is blessing all of his children one at a time on his deathbed, he's going one at a time, and those are all, this is a fascinating chapter concerning the history and the future history at this point of Israel. But we're very interested right now about Judah, and it's going to begin in verse number 9. In fact, I may back up just a little bit. Let me go to verse number 8. Listen to this prophecy and the blessings that Jacob gives to his son Judah. He says in verse 8, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp from the prey. My son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion. Who shall rouse him up? Listen to this, Jimmy, verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, his teeth white like milk. So many allusions to Christ here. We hear about, in Revelation, we're going to read about his vesture or his clothing or his garment dipped in blood. And we're going to see the righteousness of Christ splattered with blood as a lamb slain from the foundations of the earth. And here it says in verse number 11, he washes his garments in wine. Talking about the righteousness of Christ just absolutely stained with blood. But one thing we really want to see in this is that in verse number 10, it says that the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. Until Shiloh comes. That's why a lot of the times we'll refer to Jesus as Shiloh, this idea of a peace coming. So in Genesis chapter 49, we see that Jesus is the prophecy of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But that leaves one more reference, David, and we're going to see that in Isaiah chapter 11. Isaiah chapter 11. So yes, from Genesis 49 on, the reader of God's word would have known from Genesis chapter 49 that we are looking in the tribe of Judah for the answer. That a careful reader would know we need to trace the line of Judah because it's the one that the scepter is going to come from, and it will not depart from Judah. So Judah is the line we should have been following this whole time. And Judah then, of course, attaches to David. So we're going to see that the next connection here. Look in verse number 1, if you would. And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. Look at verse number 11 or 10, excuse me. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for in a sign of the people. Now listen to this crazy. This is insane. This is in here. So clear. To it, that is to this banner, this root offspring of Jesse, it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. So there's a coming one that created David. He's the root of David. David sprang from him. But he's also a branch from David. And when he gets there, it'll be like a large banner in the whole world where the Gentiles will run to him for rest. That's the prophecy. Of course, David is from Judah. And so that's why we see, and I hope folks are understanding why we took so much time, Jimmy, to go into Psalm 110. Yeah. Psalm 110 is the whole point of this thing. Again, Psalm 110:1, the Lord, that's the Father, said unto my Lord. Notice the first one is all capitals, and the second one is a capital L and O-R-D. Those are different words in the Hebrew. And what he's saying here, the Father said to my descendant, my descendant from me. That's what we're talking about, is God is talking to David saying, hey, listen, you will have one that comes from you that you will call Lord. Well, that was against the order. That's against the line of all biblical data. The patriarch is always in charge. King David is going to be in charge of his son and his son's son. But here God is saying something different. You're going to have one from your line that you will bow down to, that you will call Lord. He'll be your Lord, but he'll be from you. That's what we're talking about. And so in verse number 5, we learn, let's go ahead and head back to verse 5, Revelation 5:5. We learn that they're not supposed to weep because one of the elders did a Bible study for John. That's what we're reading. One of the elders said, hey, let me pull a couple of things together for you in our Bible study. I don't want you to weep because we have the Lion of the tribe of Judah and we have the root of David. He's the one that has prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals. And so what he's saying here is we're doing a Bible study. He's saying Jesus of Nazareth, it is he who has both died and risen again and fulfilled the prophecies. He alone, only him, no angel, no other man. It is only when God became a man, he uniquely was one of us to represent us before the throne of God himself. And it was one of us who could then have judgment on the covenant apostate Jews going forward. Let's go ahead and head to verses 6 and 7. He says, and I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts and of the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. And he came and he took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne. Here we have the same idea of John chapter 5, where Jesus is reminding those that he has been given the authority. He has been given the authority to exercise judgment, and in this passage, to be in charge of the resurrection. He says in Matthew 28:18, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. And here we see that passing of the baton, that God the Father, who is a spirit, and those that worship him must worship in spirit and in truth, is now handing authority, all authority in heaven and all authority on earth to a man. And this is how the gospel functions. Our mediator, our hope, is that one of us is now on the throne and thereby allowing us to come boldly before him. And his righteousness applies to us, making us then able to stand before the Father because his righteousness, his blood, has now applied to us. This is a big courtroom scene, and it's also uniquely, if you can imagine, it's not only a courtroom scene, this is actually going to be a worship service as well. This is Christus Victor. This is Christ, the one that's in charge. And here we read that Jesus here is the Lamb of God, which has been slain before the foundations of the world. And he came, notice the process here. In verse number 6, he was slain before the foundations of the world. The Lamb who had been slain. But he has 7 eyes and 7 horns. Of course, eyes represent knowledge And by the way, this represents complete knowledge, not fragmented knowledge. This is his eyes. There's nothing that gets past him. The seven indicates it's complete, and his horns always indicate power in the Bible. So here he has all knowledge and all power. That's the sevens here. It's very clear. And it just says, which are the seven spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. And he's the one that came and took the book out. Now, this is not how Jesus started his ministry. In fact, Jimmy, let's go ahead and turn to Isaiah chapter 53, because Jesus started his ministry very different. It's not like he was born in Bethlehem and immediately was given the authority to accomplish all of the Old Testament. Think with me, if you would, if this book is the Old Testament, if this book is the Old Covenant, then for him to have the authority to loose the seals of the book of Daniel and exercise judgment on the Old Covenant, then he had to live a life where he started to fulfill all of these things. And in fact, he did that. Look how he started his ministry. Let me just give an overview, and then we'll maybe look at some of the specifics. But Jesus began his ministry rejected by Isaiah 53. He was rejected by verses 1 and 2. He's rejected by the Jews. In Isaiah 53, 3 and 4, he's rejected by the Gentiles. And ultimately, Jesus was rejected, Isaiah 53, 5 through 10. He was rejected by God. Let's just read a few of these. This is one of the most famous Old Testament chapters. This is Isaiah 53. It's an incredibly clear, vivid description of who Christ will be. The prophet says, "Who hath believed our report? To whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him." In other words, Jimmy, when Jesus was born, he's basically kind of like a King David. Really wasn't that impressive. In fact, he was a root. So imagine you're trying to grow something in your garden. If you had a really hard and dry ground that was tamped down and it was just dry and it's not good soil for bearing anything. But here Jesus is like this little shoot in this hard, dry ground. In other words, it was out of place. Jesus's birth in Israel was at the point where Israel was being controlled by Rome. They were under massive political oppression. The temple was not functioning properly. There was a lot of wickedness, and the Pharisees had moved in, and Jesus was born in that environment. It wasn't exactly a welcoming committee for him. And so he was rejected. It says in verse 3, he is despised and rejected of men. Now we're going more broad here. It's of men. In verses 1 and 2, he's really rejected. It says, there's no form of comeliness, and when we shall see him, assuming here that the author is representing the Jewish people. But in verse 3, that changes to, he is despised and rejected of men. He's a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Jimmy, this is so powerful. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. What this means is, in verse 4, is if we were there on that day that Christ was crucified, we would see him on the cross, and we would hear the voices in the crowd, and we would hear them screaming, "Crucify him! Man, give that bum what he deserves." And if you and I could see that on a screen today and go back in time and look on that, you would hear voices in the crowd screaming, "Give him what he deserves. We did esteem him stricken, smitten of God." Our estimation is this is a judgment from God on this man. He's getting what he deserved from God. This is a righteous crucifixion. And we would see on this screen voices and fists up. But to our absolute horror, Jimmy, as the camera pans around, it's me and you yelling it. It's us.
Yeah.
If we were there that day, we would have said the same thing. Give him what he deserves. We did esteem him stricken, smitten of God. It's our voices calling out in the crowd to crucify him, because we didn't understand Revelation 5 yet. We didn't understand that he was a lamb slain. And lambs don't have 7 horns and seven eyes. Lambs are not all powerful and all knowledgeable. This lamb was different. And he was slain and resurrected, and all of a sudden he has 7 horns and 7 eyes. This is the one that Isaiah 53 is speaking of. And in verse number 5, but he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace is upon him. With his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. The Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. And this is largely why, Jimmy, I'm of the belief there were very, very, very few in covenant with God by the time Christ comes on the scene. Small handful, probably. And those got transferred from the hand of the Father to Jesus. He makes reference of this lots of times, and he says, all that the Father has given me, I will in no wise cast out. That's talking about during his earthly ministry, a transfer of those that were in covenant with the Father are now given to Jesus. He's saying, I'm going to keep you in my hand just like the Father did. It says here, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. I think about his meeting before Pilate in this verse. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison, from judgment. Who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off of the land of cut out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. He made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death. Remember Joseph of Arimathea? He's in a borrowed rich man's tomb. This is what this is exactly talking about. Because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Look at verse number 10. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. What's the prophecy in Genesis 3:15? I'm going to crush your skull, Satan. I'm going to absolutely decimate you, and you're going to bruise his heel, something you can heal from. And the Lord thought it was good to bruise him. Jesus didn't start off his ministry in Revelation 5. In fact, he started off his ministry rejected by the Jews, rejected by the Gentiles, rejected by God. So Revelation 5 is saying after the resurrection, after the ascension, he's brought into this throne room where now there's some business to attend to in this courtroom that we've read about in the book of Daniel. And we get into this courtroom, and it's none other than the lamb that was slain on the altar of the cross by the Romans and delivered up by the Jews. And now he alone has the ability, the worthiness to now carry out the judgment that is due to the Mosaic covenant that we've read about so many times. I hope it's making sense for folks. It really, there's a lot of detail here, and it's, I guess in that sense, it's complicated. But the overall story should really, as you're hearing me talk, you should be saying right now, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's not difficult. It's just there's a lot of detail. But
yeah, it's totally making sense to me. It's
good.
I love it.
Good. Excellent. Let's go to verses 8 through 10 on the home stretch now in this chapter. It says, and when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts, 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps, golden vials full of odours, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sung a new song, saying, thou art worthy to take the book, to open the seals thereof. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation, and hast made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. Now, I want you to notice that in these verses that are 8 through 10, what we see here, Jimmy, is we see people. Remember, these are the elders. People are worshiping God, and they're worshiping the Lamb, I should say specifically, for 3 reasons. Verses 8 through 10. 3 reasons they're worshiping. 1 is because he was slain. 2 is because he redeemed us by thy blood. And 3, he has made us kings and priests to reign with him forever. I hope folks are seeing that in Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6 that we've read so many times, was the offer for Israel to become a nation and to be made a peculiar people, a nation of kings and of priests. They were the priestly. What does a priest do? A priest is a go-between between unholy man and holy God. Israel was meant to be the go-between nation. They were the mediator nation. They were supposed to be the priestly nation to tell the Gentile nations about the love of God and his demand of righteousness that they get in covenant with him. And they failed miserably. There was only always a small faithful remnant. And as a large group, they failed. And all of them said on that day, they said what? Amen. We agree. We're in covenant with you. So you have a large group called Israel, that is ethnic Israel, a large group, but only a subset of that group was faithful remnant Israel. And that faithful group was the group that all the promises flowed through. All the big ones got cut off. And so the day of reckoning has come. When Jesus had that conversation in Matthew 23, he started talking about generations of rebellion. And he says, it's come upon this generation. The buck stops here. The Messiah has come. He's been given all authority to exercise judgment. He's worthy to loose the seals from the old covenant, the one that Daniel said to put a seal on. We see Jesus unseal. All the judgments that were prophesied in Ezekiel 1 and 2 in the throne room are now coming to fruition. The visions that we saw are now made a reality. And so these are the three reasons that they began to worship him. Because he was slain, he redeemed us through his blood, and he's actually accomplished what God set out to accomplish in Israel. This is why we refer to Jesus as the true Israel. You've heard it said before that they were a vine of God. They were in the vineyard of God. And Jesus said what? I'm the true vine. Hey, you guys have been likened onto, these different metaphors. I'm the true version of those metaphors. I wanted to use you, right? Jesus said this in Matthew 23. I wanted to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not. Well, Jesus accomplished what God called Israel to do in Exodus chapter 19, 5 and 6. And he actually did it. He's made us kings and priests to reign with him forever. He did it. And so these people began to worship him for that.
If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button. And check out the full episode by clicking the link below.